What if, on the happiest day of your life, a single letter changed everything? What if your entire past, everything you believed about yourself, was a lie? This is the story of how my wedding day turned into the biggest revelation of my life, and how I discovered that I wasn't just marrying into power, I had owned it all along. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. At 27 years old, I believed I had my life figured out. My days were simple: teaching children, helping them grow, and returning to my small, cozy apartment at night. To the world, I was just a humble schoolteacher. But deep down, I carried a past I didn't fully understand myself. Everything changed the day I met Matthew Miller. He wasn't just any man. He was thoughtful, kind, and had a warmth that made me feel truly seen for the first time. There was something magnetic about him. We met in a small cafe near my school. He held the door open for me, and when our eyes met, I felt something shift. A connection. A spark. "Excuse me, miss, but you dropped this," he said, holding out my scarf. I smiled as I took it from his hands. "Thank you. I swear I'd lose my head if it weren't attached." He chuckled. "Then, I guess it's a good thing I was here." That moment led to coffee, then dinner, and before I knew it, Matthew had become my world. But what I didn't know was that he was hiding a secret as big as the one I was about to uncover about myself. 6 months later, our relationship had grown into something deep and unshakable. He never mentioned his family's wealth or status. To him, I was just Veronica, the teacher who loved children and lived a quiet life. Then came the school field trip to the aquarium. It was a perfect spring day, and the children were thrilled. Matthew, ever so thoughtful, had volunteered to help supervise them. We walked past the shark tunnel, the jellyfish exhibit, until we reached the penguin habitat. "Did you know," Matthew whispered, leaning down to one of my students, "that penguins choose one partner for life?" The child giggled and whispered back, "Like Miss Baugh and you?" Matthew stood up, smiling. I turned to him, confused. But before I could say a word, he got down on one knee. The sound of children's laughter filled the air. My heart stopped. With a small velvet box in hand, he opened it, revealing a ring that sparkled like the ocean. "Veronica, I want to spend my entire life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes. I laughed. I cried. And without hesitation, I said, "Yes." The children held up handmade signs. "Say yes, Miss Baugh." It was the happiest moment of my life. But I had no idea this was just the beginning. A week later, Matthew came to me, hesitant. "My father wants to meet you," he said, his voice quiet. There was something in his tone that unsettled me. "Is that a bad thing?" I asked. He hesitated. "He's difficult." Difficult was an understatement. Richard Miller was ruthless, powerful, a man who had built an empire and feared nothing except, perhaps, losing control. The day I walked into his gigantic office in the Miller family skyscraper, I felt his judgment before he even spoke. He sat behind a massive oak desk, his piercing eyes scanning me as if he could see through my soul. "So," he said, his voice dripping with superiority, "you're a teacher?" I kept my posture straight. "Yes, sir." "Do you know how much Miller Enterprises is worth?" "No, sir. I'm not interested in those things." He scoffed. "Everyone says that. Until the divorce. Then, with a cold smirk, he slid a document toward me. "If you want to marry my son, you'll sign this. A prenuptial agreement. No money, no property, no inheritance. Nothing." Matthew exploded with anger. "Dad, this is ridiculous." Richard didn't even look at him. "They're all the same until proven otherwise." Silence filled the room. Then, without a second thought, I picked up the pen and signed. Richard's smirk faltered. "You're not even going to read the contract?" I met his gaze. "I don't need to, Mr. Miller. I'm not marrying for money. I love Matthew." For the first time, Richard Miller had nothing to say. The night before the wedding, my mother called me into her room. She handed me an envelope. Her hands trembled. "Your biological father left this for you. Open it tomorrow, on your wedding day." I froze. My biological father? I had never known him. My mother had always told me she raised me alone, or so I thought. "There's so much you don't know, Veronica," she said softly. "But tomorrow, you'll understand everything." And she was right. On the wedding day, just before the ceremony, I opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, property deeds, and a letter. "Dear Veronica, if you're reading this, it means your wedding day has arrived. I am Albert Vaugh, your father. You, my daughter, are the heir to Vaugh Industries. And as of today, you control 51% of Miller Enterprises." The room fell silent. Richard Miller's face turned ghostly pale. "Impossible," he muttered. But it was real. For years, my mother had secretly managed an empire. Vaugh Industries had never disappeared. It had transformed. And that day, I became the true owner of Miller Enterprises. Matthew took my hand. "I don't care about any of this," he said. "I would marry you even if you had nothing." Richard staggered back, watching his empire crumble before his eyes. And then, a voice from the back of the church. "Leaving so soon, Richard?" The air grew heavy. Albert Vaugh entered the church. Richard lost all arrogance. "It was just business," Richard muttered. "No," my father replied. "It was greed. It was cruelty. And now, justice has finally found you." The ceremony continued. And this time, it was my father who walked me down the aisle. "Now, tell us, what would you have done in Veronica's place? Would you have signed the contract without hesitation? Comment below. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this story, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories.